Okay, the road to Donegal 555 continues, right?
On the road.
Yeah. So in this case, this is something you've never done, as I understand it, but you went for some testing at UNC Asheville where they had the proper equipment. What were you testing for? And give us a general idea of why that's helpful.
Sure. So inherent in the act of cycling, the performance of cycling, a variety of physical systems, the strength of your legs naturally, but also cardiovascular, pulmonary, etc.
Right.
And the physiological details of that are what we went to Asheville to test, to see how the body's performing, where there are opportunities for improvement, where those attributes are already perhaps maxed out.
So we tested for two specific things, or
Yes.
okay.
Yes. And those were what is known as VO2 max, which is the ability of your lungs to intake and process oxygen,
Yeah.
providing that to your muscles as they need it. And then the ability of the heart and circulatory system to process the byproducts of exercise or performance, which is lactic acid. So we were looking at lactic acid in the bloodstream, looking at oxygen in and out of the lungs.
Cool. All right. Well, we shot some video to show the highlights of it. The whole process turned out to take about 45 minutes, but just in interest of time, we just narrowed it down to a few things. Let's look at the video. We went to something called the Fit Lab.
Right. And it just happened to be available there in Asheville because University of North Carolina at Asheville has a physiology department, a sports exercise department. And they make that available to athletes on demand for a fee, of course. And so here we are, and you see there the finger prick to get the blood. That's how they're testing for the lactic acid in the blood flow. And you'll see in a few minutes setting up the face mask that allows.
That was very uncomfortable, though, wasn't it?
It feels very restrictive and limiting, yes, but it does its job. They're basically checking the oxygen content of the air, both going in and coming out.
Right.
And that the difference between those two lets them know how much oxygen I'm processing.
Here she is, actually, yeah.
Yep.
Having fit in the
right. So if you can imagine driving heart rate up to its max and at the same time struggling to get your breath, it's a little uncomfortable.
I would say so, yeah. So anyway, there were, as I understood it, every so often, I think it was 4 minutes, if I remember correctly, she would amp up the resistance
on the ergometer or stationary bike there. And with that increase in resistance, we're seeing an increase in heart rate, increase in power output, of course, but what they're measuring is that heart rate change, the lactic acid change, the byproduct I mentioned of, and there you see the finger prick. They're actually going to check the blood in a dynamic sense and say, okay, at this power, at this heart rate, what's the lactic acid content in the blood? And they're looking for that inflection point, that point where your body just can't any longer at that increased heart rate, increased load, process that lactic acid and things start to shut down. And the lactic acid sense, it's an inflection point. There's a relatively linear progression of lactic acid versus heart rate. And at some point, your body says, tilt, can't process that much anymore. And the accumulation rate gets very, very steep. That's the point that becomes unsustainable. And
there were your numbers, 56.1 and 172.
172 was the maximum heart rate. No matter what they ask of my body in the way of load, cycling, running, doesn't matter. My heart has a governor on it, right? It won't go past 172 beats per minute. That's where I just...
You blow up after
that. Yeah. Right. So that's an important number to know, not because I'm going to be there in an endurance event, but it's proportions or percentages of that are either kind of in the orange zone, yellow zone, whatever you want to call it, or at the limit of green and orange that are sustainable. The 56 is, I believe, liters per minute of oxygen that the lungs are processing. That just tells you whether or not there's headroom for improvement in cardiopulmonary performance. 56 is a pretty good number. So for an endurance sport, I'm not worried about pushing that any higher. That's already plenty high. But the third number that she didn't show on that chart was the lactic acid, and actually the profile, the chart of lactic acid versus heart rate. That's a key parameter because it's that inflection point that you want to say, okay, at that heart rate, which is about 150 to 152, that's where you want to spend your most valuable training time.
And how will it inform what you're going to do literally in terms of the run up and training regimen?
Like any sport, there's a multitude of physical parameters or attributes that are needed to bring peak performance. What that test was all about really was learning how my various systems are working, where I need to spend time in training, and where there's opportunity for big improvement.
Okay.
What I learned was peak oxygen, not much headroom there. It's okay, especially, as I said, for an endurance sport. What I most valuably learned was that inflection point I've talked about, 150, 151 beats per minute. That's where I need to be spending time in order to really drive the total system performance with as much impact as possible.
And so try to sustain that as long as possible, and it gives you a window into what you can expect if you're going to be on the bike for 25 hours or whatever it turns out to be.
Right. And it won't be right there. I'm not going to spend 25 hours at 151 beats per minute, but I should be able to spend an hour at that, theoretically at least. So it's just a little bit below that, and training, pushing that, getting more and more comfortable at that 151 point is what makes 135, 140 more sustainable. That's the key.
Gotcha. All right. How's training going in general? Would you say you're happy with things?
I am. There's kind of a spiraling in on expectations, goals, and comfort that I'm ready. Setting goals too high leads to a lot of frustration and stress. Am I there? Am I not there? Etc. Setting goals too low, and
why bother?
Why bother, right? But I think I'm spiraling in on that happy medium where I think the expectations are realistic. I'm able to come home from most training rides thinking, yeah, I did what I set out to do today, and I'm reasonably comfortable at the end of it. I don't feel like I'm dying and can't go back out tomorrow. Right. So, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good.
Good deal. All right. We'll see you on the next episode.